I've always been fascinated by what I'll call the Celtic influence in and around Wakefield and Chelsea. And by that I mean the Irish and Scots that have permeated the area all around the Gatineau. In years past, I've worn my family kilt in the Canada Day parade to try and express, because I always felt that the Celtic influence wasn't recognized enough here. You know, it's not just English and French. It's, this other element. And sadly, 2 years ago, I ended up in the Wakefield Hospital with heat stroke from walking on Canada Day in my heavy wool kilt. So I've stopped doing that now.
Yeah.
But I've always been trying to. It bubbles up. It bubbles up in the music. You know, the Celtic music, Matt Celtic and people like this that are playing this beautiful old music and the family music. But I've always felt that, and we've got Fairbairn House now and that sort of thing, and so those are expressions of the Celtic influence. But I always felt it needed a little more emphasis. I always had the idea that I would wear my kilt and I would find 15 other people and wearing kilts, and we'd march down as part of the parade, and that would be a statement. The most I ever got was 3.
Mike Kinghorn just bought a kilt.
Oh, did he?
So now you might be up to 4.
There you go.
So we got you, we got Dougal.
Oh, you don't have me anymore. I'm not doing it.
Oh, you're not doing it. You just have to. I understand that you don't wear the wool underwear underneath. That might help.
Well, let's not talk about what I was wearing underneath. But I definitely overdid it at that point.
So we're at the mill here.
Yeah.
Tell me about this.
The reason Wakefield is where it is because of the La Pêche River joins the Gatineau.
Is that the La Pêche? Is this the La Pêche River?
This is the La Pêche River here. Runs from up near Masham. And so the Scots came here, Fairbairn came here, William Fairbairn, in the 1830s. Immigration from Scotland and Ireland was in full swing. You had 2 different processes going on. The famine was starting to drive people out of Ireland. That's a bit early for the famine. And the Highland clearances. They're both political decisions that were being made by remote landlords and English people. And they resulted in driving the people out of the land in Scotland and Ireland for different economic reasons. And that's a whole world of discussion and argument as well.
So this is back in the 1830s?
Well, it's probably started earlier than that. In the 1800s, generally, the height of the Irish famine was 1847. And earlier, the Scots were coming and some of the Irish were already immigrating. And we're talking millions of people. I mean, there was those 2 countries where population was decimated. Ireland has never returned to the numbers of people that they used to have.
And that was
the
the potato famine.
The Irish particularly had been forced into a monoculture there's been lots of food in Ireland. There was lots of food in 1847. Most of it was being exported is the problem. There were cattle, there's salmon like crazy, like there's still a huge salmon fishery. There's all along the coast, there's all kinds of seafood.
And it's green, it's an emerald.
It's green,
so it can grow,
it grows like crazy because it's an island in the middle of the North Atlantic. I mean, it rains every day, you know.
Yeah.
But politically, the peasants or the people that were the renters were being forced into a monoculture of potatoes because they were cheap and easy, and you could also feed the pigs on them and you could feed everything else, right? So they got forced into this area or let themselves be forced, or this gets dicey here about exactly how this happened. The famine, it was a fungus that grew and the potatoes just died for about 5 years in a row. And the first year or 2, the Irish got a lot of help from the British government. They were sending them food. Now, this is a little screwy because they were also importing food, taking their food at the same time. But it did balance to a certain extent. But then the government changed in Britain, and the government was much more conservative, and I'm not sure if that's large C conservative.
No, is that a monarchy change?
Not the monarchy, but the
had an established government.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. And their opinion was that the Irish were freeloading and it would be better to keep. At first, there were all these projects that they built. They're called famine fields and famine fences, and you can still see them. These completely useless stone fences built up these hills in the Burren and these remote areas, which were famine relief.
Okay.
So that went on for a while.
And that's like a make-work project, an infrastructure project.
But that didn't last. And so then there were 3 or 4 years of truly bleak starvation. And people had no choice but to leave. And very often the landlords, who were very often absentee landlords, they'd be living it up in London. And this is true in Scotland as well. They wanted the people off the land. So that the sheep.
Funny, what's old is new again.
Yeah, they didn't want them. They didn't want to be responsible for them. So they would often pay to send people to Nova Scotia and send people to New York and Boston, and whole families disappeared. So that's the great diaspora. That's the immigration, particularly from Ireland. And the Highland clearances were similar, with slightly different politics in Scotland as well. So vast numbers of these people arrived here, for example, and Nova Scotia.
But my family, Kerr is a Scottish name, and we ended up in Nova Scotia.
Exactly, yeah. And my family ended up in southern Ontario, McArthur, in the 1830s and before that. I found an ancestor who came over probably 1820, and he was an old man, like for a sea voyage like that, but he came over anyway. He was like basically driven over here, and that's why, we're here. But this community, meaning Wakefield and up what they call up the line.
Up the line, yeah. What does that up the line mean? I hear that a lot.
There used to be the train, right? Oh, and the train went up along the river.
And how far north did it go?
It went to Maniwaki, I think. I'm pretty sure it did.
Oh, so about 40 minutes or so.
Oh, it's about an hour to Maniwaki. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So that track that runs through Wakefield used to continue on, and it was what we're used to as the tourist track.
Right.
But the train used to go up. So they used to call that up the line, going up the line. And so there is an economic reason for all those villages there. So they were all stops on the train. So they all had hotels.
Well, so hang on a second.
Mm-hmm.
Can we back up to this building that we're right in front of, the mill?
Mm-hmm.
And Fairburn. What do you know about that?
Well, this is why William Fairburn came in, built the mill, which I think was a grist mill at first, and then developed. And
is this the same Fairburn as the Fairburn house?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's just where the name comes from. And his family came over, and Mills, being an economic center, he also owned the stores, and it became like a company town. He owned...
It was like a mining town.
It's like a mining town.
Like,
sure,
okay, sure.
Yeah, exactly.
All right,
this is not a negative thing. This is
no. He had
logical.
Had to put some infrastructure in to support the people.
So suddenly,
that were
people could live here. Now there were a few settlers up here before that.
Okay.
But they were farmers. They weren't necessarily tied to the mill. So that's the reason that the mill's here. Now he sold it to McLaren, and that's why it's the McLaren Cemetery, which is just up the hill. Which, if you look at the names, many of them certainly are Scottish, just older. And this is the place where Prime Minister Pearson is buried and stuff. It's very peaceful and quiet. So there would be an economic basis. So that's something you would have a store, and you would have a church, and that would become the center of your area. Whether this could be Martindale, it could be any of these little places, or Rupert.
And Alcove had a church
before my time. Yeah.
Yeah. And
yeah. Alcove used to be called Wakefield North, by the way.
Wakefield North.
Yeah. So
sounds like a music festival.
Chelsea, the same thing. Like these are all towns that were populated by Irish and English in the first place. That's why I always think that English is predominant in Wakefield, but that's because I don't speak good French. It's actually about 50-50.
Right.
And so a lot of the people, particularly that grew up here and that own businesses, are actually francophones, right? But they speak, as soon as they see me coming, they speak English. Anyway, I found a community here that is musically interesting and friendly and open, and I've been very happy here most of the years I've been here. Now, there is evidence of First Nation populations along the Gatineau. We were talking earlier about Rupert, and there's a lake just north of Rupert, where they've found campfire stones on the lake, and they've dated them to 5,000 years ago. So there have been people in those valleys and along the Gatineau, like which predate all this. But I'm talking about the immigration from Scotland and Ireland, right? And I'm not trying to pretend there was nobody here.
No, there was a whole world there prior to,
absolutely.
For sure.
So Joseph Irwin from Northern Ireland was the first settler to stake what I call a modern claim on the site of Wakefield. He was a farmer, and he was probably a contemporary of Philemon Wright and the economy, the lumber economy that was happening in Ottawa.
Right.
And people would come up the river, and
So he got the first first tract of land.
Apparently, yeah.
100 acres.
Mm-hmm. So we're up into the cemetery now, and it's a beautiful place, and you might be able to still pick up the sound of the falls because they're very, very strong in the distance.
And it's interesting how the cemetery is up so high. You can actually see,
Oh, yes.
the Highway 5 from up here. You're kind of perched
particularly
up really
if you
high.
go up. There's a path that goes up over top of the cemetery. Have you ever taken that?
I haven't.
Yeah, that's remarkable. It's a little bit of a climb, but it's not bad.
I'm not doing it today. It's too buggy.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't do it today. But if you take that trail, there are some lookout points up there. You can see the whole valley spread out in front of you, and it gives you perspective. And you see those hills that are so typical here because they're the result of glacial carving.
Yeah.
So the hills roughly look, they're not all like this, but the majority of them are short on the south side and long on the north side, if you look at them. What's happened is the glaciers, as they shrank, piled up earth and then rose up over top of these hills and then dissipated that earth on the north side as they were retreating. Well, we're out along the Shoaldice Road now, just north of Wakefield. And this is a stunning valley up there. I always thought that would be a beautiful place to live, that valley. If you didn't have riverside property or lakeside property, that would definitely
This is second best, right?
Oh, what? It's not even second best.
No,
it's equal.
It is. You're right. I agree.
But it's very, very beautiful.
And look at the colors popping.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing?
I love it. I ride my bike up there a lot. So we're approaching the beautiful little tiny O'Reilly Cemetery.
Yeah, I got to explore a little bit. I didn't actually explore it, but
I heard that.
Dougal made me aware of it last weekend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you go right by it,
But I never noticed it.
Yep.
I've driven past it a few times until Dougal showed it to me last weekend.
A lot of people don't know. I see it because I ride my bike there.
Right.
So
You're
it's easy. But if you're driving up the road headed to...
I'm a lazy ass. I need a bike, maybe.
Yeah. Well, it can be good. So that's just a beautiful little ceremony. Those, the Rileys came from an area called Cavan. And Cavan is in the kind of central east of Ireland.
Okay.
So if you look at the gravestones, they generally talk about coming from Cavan. But that was, as Dougal said, Dougal actually knows more about this cemetery than I do. But someone brought in all the gravestones, which were spread out over a large area and had fallen into ruin, essentially.
Okay.
And remounted them in that little square
and
put up the obelisk and everything like that. And they keep that cemetery very nicely. And I think that's the family, the Riley family or O'Reilly family. It's probably O'Reilly originally.
Right.
So that's always been an interesting little stop on the road,
Yeah.
So then you head along to LaSalle, and if you continue straight, instead of, you guys were coming the other way in your previous drive, so you turned there. But if you can go straight, and so you're going straight north essentially, you come into farmland and a gravel road, and that road winds around and comes down into Feralton. I guess that's not the main road there. I can't quite remember the name of the road where you turn. It comes down a beautiful hill. It's beautiful on a bike if you're going downhill. It's just murder if you're going up.
So you want to always make sure you're heading in the right direction.
I made that mistake once. Yeah, it's one of those endless hills. You think it's over, and you come down into Feralton, and Feralton is Irish. William Farrell is the guy that started it. There's a church there and a graveyard, and this is where you start. Where in the past we've done some explorations of local stories and stuff, and this is where you start running into the fairy stuff again. People will start talking up there about fairy hills and fairy spots and fairy trees and stuff like that.
But now you and I had a conversation earlier, and I'm going to play that as a separate segment because that's very interesting. But these aren't your Disney fairies.
No. That all got commercialized, obviously, and you mentioned Tinkerbell and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I don't think Tinkerbell is actually one of the ancient fairies. In Ireland, the fairies are not friendly. They're not positive particularly. They're to trick you, and they'll steal your children, and they'll steal everything from you, and you have to make peace with them. We were talking about the Tomtars, the idea of going out and making peace with the spirits of the place. People in Ireland don't want the fairies on their property, but they can't. There's no way to really defeat them, like other than possibly blocking up their entrance to their fairy holes and stuff like that.
So it's a spirit, and you're just trying to reduce the interaction. You're going to kind of respect their space.
Yep.
And you don't want to irritate them.
Don't want to irritate them, and you don't want to get into any deals with them because you're going to lose. You're going to lose. I think we'll head north.
Up the line?
We're going up the line and up to Low and to Martindale.
Martindale. I've never heard of Martindale.
Martindale's a very tiny village, and it's just past Low. It's not on the 5. If you come into Low, just coming into Low, there's a restaurant, a gas station, and there's a little sign that says Martindale, and you take that road, and it will also lead you up to the Poggan Dam, which is this.
That's the Low Dam?
Yeah.
Is that what they call the Low Dam?
It's called the Poggan Dam. Yeah.
Okay, all right. I had a chance to go up there last fall.
It's amazing, isn't it?
And I did Mountain Road up. Whoa.
Yeah.
What a gorgeous drive.
And it's amazing to realize that we live under that dam, and that that force is above us.
There's a lot sitting there that just
tremendous.
Luckily, that little boy still got his thumb in the dike.
So when they built the dam, they used a lot of Irish laborers for that.
Oh, so how old is that dam?
Well, the dam is not old back. It's not back into the famine. It doesn't go that far back, but that would be in the 1900s, 1925 or something like that. I'm not quite sure when that was built, because they built a whole series of dams in that period. That's what changed the course of the river and everything. But there was another bunch of Irish people that came in. There was another immigration at that point to work on it, along with Scandinavian Swedes and stuff like that. So there's a lot of Finnish names up there and stuff. Yeah. One of the stories I heard about the building of the Poggan Dam and the Irish, when the Finns came, and I guess the Swedes as well, one of the first things they did, of course, was build a sauna. Of course, that's standard equipment. That's their deal.
That is their thing.
Well, the Irish had never heard of anything like this. This was just the most bizarre.
It's probably a fairy house to them.
Well, they're you can picture them gathering around and going, "What the?" And but apparently they were all converted into sauna people. Because particularly coming from a cold country like Ireland, it's just
they got it
wonderful, so they became like habitués of this sauna, and we'll spend a whole lot of time lounging around and doing stuff that Irish people normally don't do. Right. Apparently, that was a really big deal.
Oh, that's interesting, because that's a huge thing, especially in the wintertime.
Oh yeah,
you get the sauna going up, you jump on the lake, and then you hop into the sauna.
Exactly. You figure normally at that time, I guess by the 30s it'd be a little bit different. How would you? Sauna, how would you bathe? You'd have to heat up water, and they do a whole deal. And here was this marvelous device, the sauna, and the whole communication thing that happens in saunas, and so apparently that was a big deal. So Martindale is just up the road a little further. I went up there last night. I hadn't actually gone to. I studied Martindale, the Martindale Pioneer Cemetery, it's called, which is a mark of the Celtic influence in this area, and is a fascinating story. I'd studied it online. I'd never actually been there. After we talked last night, I got in my car and drove up there. Yeah. And there's what they call a Celtic cross that they've built there out of limestone. and it's not as huge as I've seen ones in Ireland that are 3 times as big, quite frankly, but they're called high crosses.
Right.
But it's beautifully done, and the story is too complex to go through here, but there was a local lady that was bothered that the Celtic influence wasn't being acknowledged, yeah.
Okay.
And so she spent years of working with and against the church to bring these bodies, or at least the stones of the settlers, the original settlers, into another area, because the whole cemetery up there apparently had fallen into disuse. And the local church did actually fight them on this. They didn't want to deal with this, right? To the extent that the cemetery was actually destroyed at one point by the church. And they actually sent in diggers because it was drawing too much attention.
How long ago was that?
Well, she'd still be alive, I think. So like it would be 50s and 60s, I think. It's probably, I'd have to check that online. But there's very interesting, you can find it if you just Google the cemetery.
So that's the interesting part, is that she was a woman in the 50s and the 60s,
yeah,
probably telling these men what to do.
That was part of it, and telling priests. And,
right.
And like there's obviously some very control issues there, both ways probably. So they built this beautiful thing, and there's the Celtic cross, and there's also a memorial that they had built. They raised the money with a gorgeous signs in Gaelic, French, and English. And I'm going to read you, maybe just to finish this off, because this is like kind of coming to a point where the Celtic influence is being recognized. So I'm going to read you what's inscribed. The cross is inscribed in English, French, and Irish with these words: "May the light of heaven shine on the souls of the Gaels who left Ireland in the years of the great famine to find eternal rest in this soil. They will be remembered as long as love and music last."
Wow.
Isn't that nice?
Wow.
Yeah. She was born and raised on the famine coast, believing in the Banshee and the Holy Ghost, beguiled each day by the bejeweled bay. Fare thee well to Galway. Cobbled roads to the Spanish gate, and down to the Claddagh where the black ships wait. Out in the Curragh and we're making way. Fare thee well to Galway. Fare thee well to Galway. So cold, so dark, so quickly done, the burren fades in the setting sun. A whole new life has just begun. You're bound for Nova Scotia. They bring out the bodies when we reach Groseal, steel grey river running under our keel. You'd call it a river, we'd call it a sea, wider than the Shannon. Fare thee well to Galway. We go to your schools where we're beaten and caned and made to conform and to be ashamed if we speak our language or use our name. We're marked as something other. But school is a dream time too soon past. Very quickly the die is cast. 3 children now, more coming fast, and she was not yet 20. Fare thee well to Galway. Fare thee well to the salmon weir. Fare thee well to the dark hills rising. Never coming back here. And high above the river called the Gatineau, many are the greystones, many are the rows, many are the graves from long ago, and every stone says Ireland. We get up to Rupert 'bout twice a year. We clean up the graves, we gather near. We join our hands, we shed a tear, and sing Faretheewell to Galway. Faretheewell